Hi, my name is Clemmons. Welcome to Formative and Summative Assessments for Dummies like me. If you're anything like me, when you first started learning about formative and summative assessments, the only thing you really knew was that assessments meant a test of some kind, and that didn't exactly bring along any kind of good, healthy feelings. So today we're going to learn about formative and summative assessments. I'm going to do that in two parts. This is part one of a two-part series. So as we take a look at the overview, the first thing I want you to notice are the questions related to formative and summative assessments. When it comes to formative assessments, we're always asking, how do I know how I'm doing? And with summative assessments, we want to know when we've arrived. We're going to use a GPS as a metaphor to help us through this today because it's a great example of how to receive feedback. It uses visual, auditory, and tactile capabilities to reach any driver, just like we would want to use as an instructor for any student. So to get started, let's take a look at formative assessments. Keeping in mind that formative assessments answer the question, how do I know how I'm doing? We take a look at the characteristics of those assessments, and the first is they're ongoing and repetitive. In other words, we keep saying the same things over and over again, perhaps even in a different way, but with the intent to consistently offer feedback to the learner. Just like a GPS will always remind us how far we've got to go before we reach a particular turn, and remind us again as we get closer to a particular objective. Second characteristic is that we're always monitoring progress with formative assessment. We always know how we're doing because we're always looking at where we're at related to our next goal and the completion of our next goal. Just like a GPS will tell us how many miles we are from an exit, for example, we can do the same thing with our students. We can tell them how close they are to completing a particular task and help them in their progress to get to the next one. Third, we can always focus on our strengths and weaknesses as it relates to feedback. As it relates to feedback on strengths and weaknesses, one of the things a GPS will do for us is tell us if we made a wrong turn. It'll also tell us how to reroute to reach our original objective as soon as possible. We do the same thing when it comes to our students. Sometimes they make mistakes, so it's important for us to be there for them to give them the feedback that will reroute them back to their original objective. It also gives us an idea on some of the things we're doing well. For example, if you take a look at the bottom right hand side of this screen, you can see the speed limit. And this will tell us if a student is going too fast or too slow. And sometimes it's important for us to recognize as our students are progressing towards their goals. The formative assessment should always be relevant and engaging. It should be timely. It should be beneficial to them at their just-in-time moment. And it ought to engage them as a learner in any perspective. That way, they feel like they're part of the process and they're always engaged. In relationship to that, it should always be purposeful and directed towards the goal, in fact. What's the point of giving feedback if it doesn't have a singular purpose to it? What is the purpose of feedback if it doesn't help them reach their goal? As we take a look at these 5 characteristics of a formative assessment, we can't help but look at those and realize there's some significant advantages to them. The first advantage is they identify conceptual errors. This is how we know we've made mistakes, and mistakes have to be okay for learning. After all, the intent here is to learn. So when it comes to formative assessments, they help us find the mistakes that we made, both in the process and in our learning, and perhaps from an instructor perspective, the way that we teach. Another advantage to them is promotes active reflection. It's always important for a student to know, to take an opportunity to look at how far they've come. GPS does that because it gives you a perspective of what's behind you in terms of your trip and what's still in front of you left to go. Another advantage is it encourages feedback. We want to continue the cycle of feedback all the time between a student and an instructor. This way, they're always part of the process. Everybody's involved, and they get a chance to own their own learning. As it relates to a GPS, for example, we know that the owners of a GPS, if there's a problem in our routing, something has gone wrong, like construction, for example, we can give feedback to the owners to say, hey, there's something wrong with how your directions are working right now. Here's a chance for you to correct it. The same thing is true in a learner-instructor relationship. And this concludes part 1 of this series in regards to formative assessments. Part 2, we'll take a look at summative.